Donna, great to see you again. For those who don't know, Dr. Donna, she is my go-to global governance guru. And we've worked together for about a year now, and we'll be covering all things boards and diversity and governance and startups and board talent, board placement, and some of the biggest misconceptions that I run into on a regular basis. So for those who don't know you yet, Donna, could you share a bit about you and about BoardWise?
Sure. We started a management consulting firm in 1982, so it's 40 years old now. And it was about 12 years ago when some of our clients were complaining about governance things. And we looked at it and said, yeah, this needs attention. It's not focused as it needs to be. So we set up a wholly owned subsidiary, which we call BoardWise. And because our management consulting had crossed 52 countries, we had a lot of points of entry already, which made it relatively easy for us to go back and say, and now we're going to add this as an advantage for you. So we were able to start right out the gate with an interest in global governance as opposed to whatever's endemic in the United States or any other place. So we don't really compete with anybody in that if you have a National Association of Corporate Directors, we sit sidecar to that and say, and we add the international piece of it and complete it and round it out. And what we're aiming to do with that is to create an understanding of best practices in governance over time, over the planet, so that you can learn from each other in a more meaningful way. And it's been a lot of fun. It's great that we're learning while we're helping.
So, broad strokes, how many board placements would you say you've done?
Yeah, well, I can kind of give you numbers because you had mentioned that to me earlier as to what we're doing.
Broad numbers, yeah.
Yeah, we have trained 1,952 people.
1,900.
1,900, yeah, 952. I did look it up for you. And then in terms of total placements, it's 1,762.
Wow.
That's global.
Right, global.
Yeah.
What's your association with Harvard again? Like, what's that history there?
A colleague of ours in Europe, Fred, and our firm got together with Harvard to create a program that would look at global governance.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a three-legged stool of combining our talents to be able to look at that in a meaningful way. And that was developed early on, so 11, 12 years ago. So it's been running until COVID, of course, when we couldn't do it. And it's going to reinstate itself, but it's been a challenge because that is meant to be an intensive where people from all over the globe come together and they're looking at cases. And most people will say, well, in Germany this way, Asia this way, the US this way, Africa this way. Right. And if you can't just use and apply what is your regulatory compliance onto some other regulatory environment that you're sitting in, you're going to screw it up. So what we're trying to do is get people to think, and there's no right answer because nothing sits above the nation state to adjudicate in matters of difference. So it's the wisdom of the people around the table to say, what shall we do? Yeah. And that's pretty stimulating.
Yeah. And you said you've been on like 13 boards or so?
I have.
Wow. That's incredible.
13 boards, and every one of them is different. Uh-huh. If you think you understand it, you're foolish because every single one will be different.
That's right. You can never graduate from the school of learning, right? When it comes.
You don't. And, that's one thing in terms of folks that are interested in looking for opportunities. I have never been party to an opportunity like that through a search firm. No offense, Chris.
No, this is part of the topic, referral networks. We got to talk about.
It's all about the referral networks. Not a single one did I get through a proper search or a formal search. It was somebody who knew my work, who had referred me to a committee to say, you need to talk to her. Or they would call me and say, you got to take a look at this one. It's really where they need you. And then you explore it. And when your network is strong enough to know who you really are and what you're about and what you could bring, they become the ambassadors. Right. And your credibility goes up way better than if it were done through just a search firm that's finding candidates based on specs.
Yep. What do you see as the greatest roadblock to executives landing board roles in all your years doing this? What are some of the biggest roadblocks?
Well, one is when they write an executive resume instead of a board bio, because they're focused on all the things that they're doing as executives, notwithstanding the fact that they're capable and Yahoo. But when a committee is looking, they don't care. Everybody on the board's already got that. That's like a given. So it's how you present what you're going to bring. And it has to be more than just your executive competency.
Right.
So that's one problem. The other is it not finding a targeted approach to where you really should be hoping to find the right thing, as opposed to just creating a board bio and spraying it and praying.
Spray and pray.
Yeah, that somebody's going to find you. That's usually a problem too. And the idea of focus and targeting really makes the intended work that you're doing better use of your time. I worked with a guy named John Genova, and he was in upstream oil and gas. And he decided he'd gotten to a stage where he thought board work would be appropriate. Now, that's a swim lane. He's got deep knowledge in this. And what he did was study the supply chain for the work that he was doing, and said, if these companies understood better upstream, they would be smarter in the way they do their business. So he found 5 companies in that supply chain. He wrote a 1-page letter making the case for why his intelligence contributing to their strategy would improve their performance. He sent it to the chairs of the board, and he got 5 offers.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. And we do a lot of that. We look laterally for people to say, where can you bring value?
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And it makes a big difference.
This is one of the reasons I enjoy working with you. This happens quite a bit. I work with executives. They might have been on 1 to 2 smaller advisory boards. They might have done a nonprofit board, but they can't seem to land the boards they really want. They've had a taste of it, but they can't really seem to get the ones that the broader ones, the international, the corporate, the large corporate boards, the Fortune 5000 boards. What would you say to those? Like, what would you say to those people who have had the taste but can't seem to really land the boards they really want?
Well, there's a big difference between serving on an advisory board versus the others that you're talking about. Advisory work is great because you bring your expertise and you're part of a kitchen cabinet around the CEO. And it's much more applied value that you're doing than would be necessarily part of the compliance and the regulatory duties of care that you have on the regular boards. So first you have to know, do you really want to go the other way? If what you love doing is making a business perform better, then advisory work is terrific. I love serving on advisory boards because that's much more valuable to yourself when you can see the company grow and you did it, right? Which is quite different than, let's make sure the proxy filing says all the right things. You spend a lot more time in the committees on those duties of care. Now, if you really do want to move, then you've got to think about what your point of entry is. And when you describe that somebody wants to go into a public board, that's tough. The requirements and the rigor of the standards for the candidacy are much stricter. And we use a profiler technique to find out how board able is somebody based on those criteria. If you're looking at a public board, the requirements are how much work you've done in international. How many times have you worked on really complex problems and proven that you've solved it in what way? What kind of value can you bring in terms of the long-term strategic thinking of a company? What resources can you bring to play on raises for capital if it's a pre-IPO company that's about to go public? What experience do you have with the committee structures that are going to be different than you've ever worked in before? Those are all things that you have to have a story. And you have to know where you're armed for success, or you're not going to make it.
Yeah.
And that evolution I recommend for people who haven't made that is to get on a board that's just pre-IPO. Yeah. And then ride that as it goes public, because then you're on your first public board and that establishes you for your eligibility for other ones.
What are some of the other bigger misconceptions you run into for people that are in training in board governance or want to be trained in governance? What are some of the bigger misconceptions?
Well, a simple one is because I'm an expert in cybersecurity or whatever, I deserve to be here to help.
Mm-hmm.
When in fact, you have to be a holistic thinker to be a board member. You can have your subject matter expertise, but you've got to have a lot more.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, yeah, you're just there because we need you, but we don't really like that. They want people who are more than just that.
Yeah.
So, for example, we had an opportunity to work when the chief medical officer for Pfizer was getting ready to retire. And he was saying, I would like to consider board work in the future. And he knew what he knew and he knew what he didn't know. So he wanted to get certified and understand the breadth so that he could serve in a fuller capacity. And I had warned him that you're not going to have an issue with finding opportunities. It's going to be choosing. And he didn't believe it.
Right.
Until the day he retired, and then he got 16 calls. and it was a choice that you had to figure out, okay, what's the best use of you, which is important for all the people looking for board opportunities. It's flattering to be invited, but you have to have some sense of what's going to be the right fit for you.
Yeah, absolutely right.
It's a double study. I mean, flattering notwithstanding, that you should make a good choice, especially for your first one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's going to inform you for your future ones too. Yep. They do say, people who've been through this, that the second board is the one where you start to get your wheels and you know what you want for the future.
I've heard a number of
it's always the first one's the hardest. Absolutely. And then the second one sort of gets your wind and your sails. And I work with a woman that I put on a couple of boards early on, and now she's been doing this work for a good 12 years or so. And I called her because there was a company in Canada that looked like it would be a good fit, but it's early stage. And she has done IPO for the last 6 years. And she said, I think I need to stay in that because I've really become an expert. And that's knowing where you belong, which is important. But you can't know where you belong till you've had a couple under your belt.
Yeah. That's one of the bigger challenges I run into with helping executives is creating a list of your non-negotiables and why. What's most important to you this phase of your career? What do you say no to when it does come across your desk? And also,
you do have to know yourself. I got a call from an investment group in Atlanta, and they had seen that I was on the board of a company in New York that was in the fintech space. And he had a client that was in that space, and he was asking, would I have room or capacity to take a look at that? As it turned out, it was a distressed company. Okay, boards need really good people that can work on that. But I said, there's the metaphor of the physical therapist versus the surgeon. And the thing you're looking for is the surgeon, and I'm the physical therapist. This is, your arm isn't working, let's fix it and move it forward, right? You have to know that about yourself, because it's fine. I probably could do the work, but I wouldn't be happy. Yeah. And that's important to know, that you're fitting where you are really excited to make a difference.
I'm also surprised at the number of CEOs I work with who said that the next phase in their growth, their career growth, they became a much better CEO after being on a different board, after they saw all the different challenges of a different board that helped their own companies.
That's research that we've done. If you, as a CEO, serve on somebody else's board, you become a better CEO.
Absolutely. Because
you're learning different problem-solving styles. You're learning orientation to peer-based leadership, which is something that you don't have to use when you're an executive. But once you learn to do it, you bring it home. And guess what also happens? Retention goes up in the company because people love it.
Yeah.
And this is all research we know. You just become a better person if you do this, a better professional. And you're just able to do more things because you're learning while you're helping. And that's the double win.
When do you think someone's truly ready for a Fortune 5000 corporate board? What does that look like for you?
They've done their homework. They got themselves prepared. and they have focused on an industry or a plan like the lateral looking, so that it's really focused. Then they're ready. Then it's introducing themselves to the right parties that can either be ambassadors for you or are helping you find where those opportunities are. Yeah. If you want to, I mean, the notion is you hang with the people who know. Mm-hmm. If it is still 86% of the positions are based on peer-based networking. So you got to hang with the people who know. That's either professional associations like Women's Corporate Directors Association or the private director association. Those are all in play right now. And now there's specialty groups based on Latinos or, Black people or whatever the associations are. You can pick where you think you will hear more soon.
Yeah.
And if you're building the network of people who are listening and they know that this one's coming up, they can refer it or refer you, mm-hmm. which is important. And it's the only way you can stay current anyway, is to do that. Most of those associations are educative as well. They're keeping you current. One of my colleagues, Nola Masterson, says that the duties of care for a really good director are to be current always. Don't go to bed, stay up and find out what's happening tomorrow. And be Yoda. You have to be Yoda. You have to see way out here and be wise enough to do the right thing. And I love that combination because it's pretty much true. If you're a futurist, you're going to do just great. And so if you're not a futurist, watch the ones that aren't and figure it out.
I love that. So what's the biggest challenge, the talent challenges you see in the board ecosystem? What are some of the bigger talent challenges you run into?
Well, depending on the maturity of the board itself and what they're trying to look for, you want to screen for the maturity of the group that you're going to be working with. Mm-hmm. Screen for whether they're there for ego versus sincere quality of thought. I have another colleague who says that boards bring out the best and worst of you. And I would chuckle at that until I started finding out he was right. Some of the people who are social way, one way, and then at the board table, totally different, will wake you up. And it will surprise you, the emotional baggage that goes with some decisions that go on in boards. I was in a board meeting. I wasn't the board member, but I was present for this meeting in Malaysia where there was a chair of the board who was listening to one of the directors bring up a topic. And he didn't like that. He said, if you bring it up again, I'm going to kill you. I guess the director thought he was kidding around because he waited another 20 minutes and brought it up again. The chair got up on the table and crawled over and started strangling him. And they're pulling him off, and the general counsel is writing notes saying debate ensued.
I think a little bit more than a debate was there. Debate ensued. For the official record, it was just a debate. Yeah, friendly debate.
That's right. That's it. And my other colleague said, why didn't you just say team building began?
Yeah, it's a corporate exercise, right?
You will see very strange behaviors that go on, and you have to be prepared to handle those with grace and calm and know how to course correct. And that's also why this whole diversity of thought is so important in the board, because there's typically somebody who has the gift of a uniter, who is the one who's earned the reputation of respect around the room, that person can call it when it's out of line, and everyone will go, you're right, and then they calm down.
Yeah, please stop strangling your neighbor. That would be
yeah. I think we want to say that one a little differently. And I have that in my personality. And oftentimes in boards where they get a little cocky with their language, and I'll say, now, Adam, I think what I heard you mean was this, and I reframe it. And he'll go, yeah, that's what I meant. And that's okay. That's a value that you bring so that you can move forward with the content, which kind of leads us to the whole idea of this diversity of thought, because there's nothing wrong with the styles. What's wrong is when you've got too much of one.
Right. Tell us about that. So we hear diversity. Some of my executives, they just disqualify themselves immediately based on wrong ideas. What's this movement towards diversity of thought, diversity of experience? Yeah,
well, there's precursor research is about diversity of problem solving. And there are different orientations. And if you screen for that and you create a table of discussion around a problem and everybody's coming at it a little differently, the quality of the decisions and the ideation goes way up. And we know that from science. So if you've got a whole group and they all think alike, it's not really a board, it's a party. Everybody gets along, they all go, yeah, but it may be really limited in incremental thinking. If you break that into different orientations, you're going to get better results. Mm-hmm. And we know that. So we're big advocates for making sure that's true and that there's maturity to handle that in an inclusive way, which is a skill set. Now, when you get into boards, you're going to have a funky mix, typically, of people that are investors and they've never been trained in governance. They just think they know it all. And you've got their wallets. And so they have influence in passion tied to that conflicted party that it's not legal, you can't do it, but it's really an emotional tie that you have to work through. And if you're stepping into one of those environments and you've been trained and they haven't been, you have to do that with grace and style so that you are making your point and growing them up in a meaningful way. So it's important to know that there's a style for somebody who has the social mores of the group and holds that well. There's another style that's challenging, and they're really great at being able to say, here's where we are, here's where we want to go, but they're not necessarily gifted at how.
Right.
So they really partner quite well with the people who have 90 ideas before breakfast, who don't care about the details. They just have the ideas. So you put those two together and then they become a powerhouse for the rest of the board that might have a low appetite for risk or feel stuck or whatever. And so you've got that combination that when brought together actually work really well.
Yeah.
And then there's one rare style. It's like 1 out of 900 of the people that we assess. That's an equal amount of all the others. Very rare.
What's that called? That Yoda profile? Is that the
yeah, kind of.
the Yoda profile?
We don't call it that. We just call it the guardsmanship or something. But the idea is that they can broker when others don't understand each other. They can clarify it and put it in language that gets it through. And they're very gifted at moving things along when there's something stuck. And the first time we started doing these tests, there was a woman who was the chair of the board for Deloitte in Asia. And she was like one of the first ones that scored that way. And she said, she asked a really good question. Have I always been like that? And I said, it's a good question. We'd have to study people like you over time to see if people evolve or whether this is sort of core and then you just build on it. Yeah. I don't know. It'd be a great study, but we haven't done one to see if you become different over time. But the important thing is for you as an individual to know which is yours so that you can be clear not only in what you're presenting as what you contribute, but to understand whether it's a good fit. Because if you're invited and your style is what everybody else is, run, go find another one.
So how many board assessments would you say you've been brought into over the years where it's a messy board situation, they're not talking, the founders don't like each other, and you've seen all the situations. How many of those have you been a part of, would you say?
Oh, I don't know in count, but it's not that we're doing it for purposes of that. Board evaluations are mandatory now. Mm-hmm. Companies have to do them in public arena anyway. They have to do them. How they do them is different by country. If you're in one country, you have to have a third party do it. But in the United States, you don't. In the early days when that was first announced, the way it was done was just the board sat around and how'd we do?
Good job.
Yeah, good job. Yeah, okay. And then they put it in the proxy files. We had a nice chat. And I know I worked with a gentleman who was the CEO of a public company, and he wanted to bring us in to do it. And the chair of the board said, no, it's not required. We can do it. I'm doing it. And the CEO said to him, but what if we hate you? It doesn't matter. I'm doing it. Well, he quit because he didn't stand the guy. But in the meantime, so did the chair get thrown out eventually. He was the founder, no less. But the laws are now moving, and so are the expectations that a third party evaluation would be smarter. And what we would like to think is that because we're looking at governance across all the globe, that we could build enough wisdom to say, here's what's happening and here's the results, because experiments and change have to be tested over time. And it takes 3 to 5 years for you to say it's got traction or not. And so if we could be a go to us, and we'll give you some views on this, that you can make better decisions than just testing. When the banks collapsed, and that was a big mess, what happened with governance practices is that everybody said, well, what we're doing isn't working as well as it should, so we'll try something new. Well, experiments are good, but you don't know if they're going to be useful. And they're happening all over the world. When I was in Vietnam working on a project, the stock exchange person was sitting next to me in this panel we were doing, and he was announcing that they have a new practice, which is that not only are they doing the board evaluations, but they are presenting the full findings at the shareholder meeting.
So if someone strangled somebody else, that would be on the report.
Complete transparency, open kimono,
Yeah.
And I said, is that for real? He said, yes. And I said, nowhere in the United States is that happening, because everybody's terrified of activist shareholders coming in, and they keep it secret, and they keep it under lock and key under the GC so that it's not accessible. And, we'd go like this, whereas Japan and Asia now is starting to look like this and open it up. Transparency is probably a good thing. And if we watch it over time, and a persnickety little country like Vietnam is doing well with it, it's likely to be investigated and considered going forward. That's the sort of stuff we'd like to look at to see.
I might have heard it once from you before. Is it true that the U.S. is the only country that doesn't mandate certification and ongoing education? Did I hear that right? For board placement?
Well, no, it's not the only one that isn't mandating it, but
in the developed countries. You said Europe requires their certification.
If you go to Australia, you cannot serve unless you've been certified. In Europe, several of the countries, not only is it certification, but it's continuing education. They call it permanent education. You have to keep doing it. Mm-hmm. Here, it's considered a best practice, not mandated. But that's because our philosophy as a country has been don't mandate.
Don't mandate.
It's philosophically correct, but I'll tell you, it doesn't work very well. Yeah. And Canada's going through the same thing right now in terms of the philosophy of diversity on the board, and they were hoping that everybody's philosophy would be mature enough that would work. Well, it isn't. So now they've created the mandate for diversity, just as some of our states are doing. Yeah. Because people get impatient after a while of goodwill ain't working. What do we do next?
Yes.
Right. And Americans are cowboys. We don't like to be told.
Yes, we do not, especially in Texas. They do not like to be told what to do. Yeah. So tell me, what's the, you mentioned before the placement rate. So 9 modules with your team. What's the average placement rate after they go through this training, would you say?
Well, it kind of goes in stages. In the ones that we've done, about 30% of them place relatively early because they're ambitious and they're doing their stuff. Yeah. Others will come a little later, either because of personal preference, timing or whatever. And so it jumps up if we're just tracking it to more like 65% over time. And then others, change their minds or wait. Or my sister called me 2 years ago, all heady to do it. And then COVID hit and she said, I want to wait. Those things happen.
Sure.
But I would say, depending on their ambition to do the work they have to do and whatever else is going on in their life, that it could be soon or later.
Yeah.
In a norm, if you just do the math on people from the day they decide I'm going to do this to the time they land a seat is 6 to 9 months.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's great.
Yeah. They're doing their work and then they're trying to get their network going, and then bada bing, something happens.
So referral networks, tell us more about that. A lot of people, they have this impression boards are just
cannot have enough of them.
Don't have enough referral networks. Okay.
You really have to insinuate and build a network in the equity investor community, in the associations where the other folks that already are on boards are sitting, so that you get to know them. And I would recommend too, looking for yourself. So if you're joining an association, you're going to be snooping. That's good. If you are tied in a community where there are acceleration groups for new businesses that are growing, that are being invested in, and they're humming, trying to get some help. You can go in and nominate yourself to be part of the help, and then they like your work enough that they convert you.
Yep.
Or you can take investment groups like the nonprofit Astia, ASTIA, was started 22 years ago, and it was an angel investment group that was trying to put investment capital available for women CEOs that weren't getting access to capital, because that was a problem, a long historical problem. They, for free, have a resonance software platform. You can go in and it's free. You can just sign up and you can put your profile in there, and you can say, I'd like to be considered as a advisor. Mm-hmm. That allows you to go study the companies that are looking for help. Mm-hmm. And if you find one that is a good fit for you, you self-nominate and say, hey, I would like to help there. And they instantly introduce you to the CEO, and you can get your dialogue going. When they first announced that, I've been a mentor in that program for many years, but when they first put the platform in place, I went and poked around. I looked at 12 companies, and one of them I found that I thought a lot about. And they, within 10 minutes, introduced me, and within a week, I was on their board.
If only it was that simple, just bam.
Well, here's the thing about, the degrees of separation that we always talk about. It's shrinking. It's 2. It's not 6 anymore. And so if these systems are helping you find each other and you take the initiative, you're going to be so much more satisfied than if you just write your board bio and you give it to every search firm and you hope that somebody finds you.
Spray and pray. Don't do spray and pray.
It's much better. You go out and you start to test your own muscle with parties. And that's a good learning experience. Even if you don't get it, you're learning how to pitch yourself and how to screen and take a look at things. And, the investment of something like Astia is that you're committing to talk to a company 3 or 4 calls. Yeah. And that's not a big deal. And you're learning while you're helping when you're talking about these early stage companies, because it's all innovation, which is great. That's my world. So I recommend that people focus on the communities where the opportunities are well known. Yeah. And then also really know the difference between fit and not fit. Mm-hmm. And then go for finding the things that are tied to your fit. Don't waste your time on the ones that don't make any sense for you. Yeah. Flattering notwithstanding, unless you're like one of these people that just think that every experience is a learning curve. And so I'm willing to take it, even if I think I don't like it. And
every offer I get, I want my LinkedIn covered in advisory boards. We see that. Well,
there's one thing I do say, always take the interview.
Sure.
But, no matter what it is, always take the interview, because you don't know what you won't learn. And you may end up meeting someone you didn't know otherwise that will be useful in 20 years. That's okay, but don't take it more seriously than that. Yeah. And, for board work, you don't want to waste everybody's time, including yours.
Exactly.
So narrow's good, and it will get you there faster.
Yep. Tell us more about your partnerships with the Risk Institute and with Portfolio. I think you mentioned Portfolio once before. Tell us more about your partnerships.
We have this material, but what we look for are people who have deep dive experience in areas that would be important for specific types of work. So if it's cybersecurity, which now, if the laws are moving through the SEC's new programs that they just are policy debating right now, we may find that companies now in a public board seat have to put a cybersecurity person on their board. Well, you've got boards that know nothing about that. They just trust the management's handling it, and they ask a few questions. Now they've got to have an expert. Well, that person has to be part of the audit and risk committee. And so this risk association does nothing but that, gets them ready for that. Now, we don't do that. We introduce cybersecurity as part of our program, but it's one of 8 hot topics. And so we're getting people to be whole and ready. But if somebody's really, really wanted doing the cybersecurity part, we have the partnership with them to say, we send you over there. And then, of course, that association says if there's somebody that wants the holism, they send them back over. So what we're trying to do as a village is create the right answers for the right people. Yeah. Now, if you've got an investment fund like Portfolio, which was started by a woman that worked in the Kauffman Foundation and was training investors on smart strategies for investment. She's now grown it out to 14 funds on hot topics right now. It's amazing the work that they're doing. And they're putting money into about 8 companies per fund. So that's 100 and some odd companies that are getting investments. And they're in that B round, C round stage. So they're getting money because they've got traction on what they're doing, but they need it to grow. That's a great place and a great space for people that want their first board seats.
Yeah.
Because you're making a constructive contribution on the operations, and you take the ride if they go the next level and take it through the IPO, and then you're in a public board seat through a learning curve.
Yeah.
So it's a little safer than trying to learn it all by yourself, because then you're with a board and they're all learning together.
Yeah.
And it's quite rigorous to get prepared for an IPO. But if you're with a team and you're learning it, and it's about a 6-month to 7-month learning curve, then you are prepared not only to be on that one, but a candidate for others. So I recommend things like that as a great point of entry. And so you're playing to your strong suit, but then you're also learning the heck out of the things that you need to be available for other reasons.
Before we wrap up here, any other crazy board stories you wanted to share? I like the stories. You got great stories.
Other than that crazy ad. So, it is true. I was on a board where a gentleman, an English gentleman, in fact, accused me of doing something sidebar with the CEO and sent a really harsh email accusing me of this. Now, this is where you have to use your grace, right? And I wrote back and said, here are the facts. And I list all the facts. And he writes back, yeah, but, like trying to defend his position. And I said, it would be better if you inquired than accused. And so he wrote a very long apology thereafter. Now, fine. Okay. Everything's fine with him. Nothing's happening ever again. He's the most strong gentleman in the world, but you have to stay really cool. In addition, since I don't know him all that well, I had my friend who does a lot of espionage background work on people and, check them out, called me and he said, hey, when he was in Cambridge, he had a Buddhist monk as a roommate. And he gave me the name and he said, just sit quietly, stay kind. And if he ever brings something up again where he goes a little crazy, just say, maybe it's time you go back and talk to this gentleman.
The monk.
Yeah. And he said, it will blow his mind. He'll think, what else does she know about me?
Donna knows all. She's in your mind.
Now I'm afraid of her. But the point is that you have to handle these things in a better way than the person who's out of control.
Yeah.
And that's all right. You learn these things. And if you screen for anything, screen for a board that's got its act together, because you're going to have fun. Yeah. In fact, the number one question that most people ask me when they're looking at a board opportunity is, will it be fun?
Yeah.
And I think if you join with a board that really works well together, it is fun.
Yep.
Even if it's a challenge, it's pretty fun. And, you have to have an understanding of patience. I worked with a gentleman who was on 2 boards and he was complaining about one and not the other. He said, there's one with all men and we make decisions and we're fine. The other group has some women on it, and every decision that we have to make is so slow because they're going into all these details and they're trying to, and I said, yes, they're synthesis thinkers and they're thinking for a long-term solution, not a short one. The other ones you're describing as incremental. We'll solve it. And if that doesn't work, we'll solve it again. We'll solve it again. But if a whole lot of holistic thinking goes in, it takes a little longer, but it's more sustainable. Right. And I said, just out of curiosity, which of the 2 companies is performing better? The one with the women.
Surprise, right? That's great.
I said, maybe you have some growing up to do, because we have to understand the value and then find where our discipline for patience is. Because if you're one of those creative people that has 90 ideas before breakfast, they have very little patience for the people who are trying to process. Yeah. Well, how would this work? And, trying to ground it.
Yeah.
Well, this person's already had it in their head and they're on to another idea.
Yeah.
So finding the way to work well and enjoy that is the trick. And that's just a human thing.
It is. Yeah.
Having the patience. And there are techniques,
Yeah.
if you're one of those fast thinkers and you know that somebody has to ground it and say it out loud when you've already set in your head, you sit like this and you go, yep, that's right. Balances your brain. And these are all techniques that people learn. I'm not kidding. They're not made up. Mm-hmm. And it does work.
My wife and I, we occasionally do marriage counseling. I'm shocked at the applications of marriage counseling in the boardroom. How often, where it's like, are you patient? Can you listen? Are you eager to change? How often these startups I work with, if there isn't those fundamentals of empathy and patience and resilience and forgiveness and clear communication, it shows. It shows.
Yeah, and appreciation for difference of thought. I love it when people think differently than me. It makes me wide open. Now, that's great. It works for me. My life partner comes at problems so differently than me and sometimes better than I was thinking. And I get excited by that. But not everybody's, if you've got people, I have a little drawing that shows that, board directors sometimes looks like, IQ, but no EQ. Mm-hmm. If you're walking in the room and that's what you're bringing, you're already in trouble. So make sure when you're looking at board opportunities that you're screening for that maturity factor, because it will inform the value of what you do. And your role is going to be different based on the group dynamics. All 13, I've never been the same person in any board because the needs and the dynamics were different. And so you bring a different part of who you are each time, which makes you a really interesting person at the end of the day.
Always got to adapt. Yeah. Great.
Well, Donna, I would encourage anybody who's interested in this to at least sit down and find a friend who's on a bunch of boards as a mentor. That's a really good strategy for, growing, and then do your homework. And if anybody's really interested in a little bit more, you can always call me. That's what we do.
That's right. Yeah. You can find Donna online, follow her. Yeah, thank you all for jumping in and sharing your stories. Donna, I really appreciate it. I look forward to the next conversation. If you liked what you heard today, feel free to jump in and share comments, and of course you can follow Donna and me on LinkedIn. We'll be all over.
Anytime.
Thanks again for all your help on this.
Okay, thanks.
We'll talk soon. Thanks.
All right, bye.